this Wednesday shipper update. I'm Zach Strickland here with Chief Economist Anthony Smith, which I believe is going to update us on the industrial sector. Anthony, what do you got?
That's right, Zach. So we got some industrial production numbers last week, but it was the end of the week. It was Friday. It kind of got overshadowed with a whole bunch of other economic news. So now it's kind of time to dive into some of those trends. So what we saw in the latest update from the Federal Reserve around industrial production was that there was an increase of 0.9%. So it was pretty substantial rise when we're looking at the rate of growth so far for industrial production. We're looking at the quarter overall because this is data through March. We're seeing just over 8% for quarterly growth rate. And so this comes after the previous quarter was 3.8% and the one before that was 3.4. And this really kind of falls right in line of anticipation of that peak really being hit that we were making that call for earlier on in the year, that there's likely going to be that peak for manufacturing. Now, that doesn't mean that there's just going to be this hard landing, that there's just going to fall off a cliff, because there's still a lot of areas within manufacturing that's been backlogged, that's still going to have a significant runway as we continue to move throughout 2022. When we look at this latest report, one of the areas that we saw expansion from in our next chart here was going to be coming from motor vehicles and parts. As we can see, this is going to be one of those areas that was really challenged by supply chain disruptions, surprise, surprise, semiconductors, all that good stuff, really being one of those big headwinds to really hold back production overall. But we're starting to see a pretty significant upward movement as of last month. Saw there was a tick up for 7.8% on a monthly basis. So that's definitely showing that there is some potential alleviation, some movement here for motor vehicles and auto parts.
Yeah, I like that you break it out here, because industrial production also includes the energy and the utility sector. So it's interesting to see the motor vehicles taking a pretty substantial increase here. It looks like maybe a little bit of that supply chain bottlenecking might have been alleviated here. It's still not back to where it was, though, kind of in that, I don't want to say pre-pandemic, but I think they had enough runway there early pandemic, because nobody was buying a car, because they were all going and buying houses and not driving to work anymore. And then it kind of, it was kind of a lagging sector to get hit with the pandemic, bottlenecks and supply chain snarls, because early on the demand side really wasn't there, right?
That's exactly right. And I mean, initially when we started to see that small window, that time frame that you're talking about, where people were just like, I don't need a car, and used car prices were just kind of like at this really auction sale almost, for in a sense. But that was really a time frame where I think the automotive industry was really well positioned to be able to handle, hardships, because we saw 08, 09, a lot of different programs kind of came into play where different dealers would really kind of put in this incentive of saying, hey, if you can't pay for this car anymore, it's okay, just kind of take as much stress off as possible off the consumer. Then we completely saw that shift. Used car prices start to continue to just kind of skyrocket. Interesting enough, we saw a downward movement in used car prices, so we're starting to see that that's starting to come down as well. So, not saying that, hold off a little bit longer and you might be able to get your Ferrari on a really hot sale, but I mean, it's definitely showing that there are going to be more vehicles entering the industry a little bit more. As we move into our next chart here, Zach, you mentioned a little bit earlier, mining. And so this is going to be one that we did see a tick up, not too surprisingly, in the most recent month. Saw that there was an upward movement of 1.7%. As you can see here, that this was an area that has not really picked up since the pre-pandemic levels, but definitely an area that's starting to have some upward movement. This is going to be one of those areas, as we continue to move forward, that's going to potentially push that longer runway for that slower but still moderate growth trend for industrial production on a little bit further.
Yeah, it looks like this one is actually on a pretty healthy stint. You normally don't want to see these huge spikes, right? This looks like a pretty strong recovery. It looks sustainable.
Definitely does. And so when we're looking at this, when we're breaking it down, one of the areas that was interesting in this one, we saw that there was a downward movement in natural gas. So natural gas has really just been tanking essentially for really most of the months as we look at the last 4 to 5 months. Last month down 2.9%, month before that down 9%. So a lot of significant downward movement in natural gas. I'll let John Kingston cover some of those movements within the industry. But overall, when we're looking at industrial production, there is still a significant runway for that that upward movement for when we saw in that first chart here, flatbed outbound tender rejection index. Of course, we're going to have some construction activity that feeds into that as well, building product materials, things like that. Non-residential, another one that we were talking about just yesterday. I know we were chatting with Tony Mulvey. I think he might talk about some of these aspects a little bit later on. Warehousing, definitely going to be an area that's going to be needed as we continue to move throughout the year and into 2023, just because those things can't get built fast enough. But as we're looking at industrial production, a lot of it's going to come down to facilities being able to be built as well. And a lot of those times, people don't want that in their backyard. They're saying, hey, I need my stuff built. I just don't want it built right next door to me. So it's going to be an area that we watch closely for sure.
Yeah, exactly. People don't want, they want all the benefit, none of the problem.
Exactly.
Thank you for that, Anthony Smith. We're going to toss to a quick break, but we will be right back.